Shalom, everyone. I'm Josiah Geoffrey.
I'm Hosea Geoffrey.
Welcome to Solid Scripture, where the whole discussion is totally by the book. Today, we're continuing our walk through the Bible as we start the book of Judges. Today's reading is from Judges 1:1 through 3:11. We've already read the passage ahead of time, but if you'd like to read it as well, why don't you go ahead and pause the video and do that, and then we'll go ahead and get into discussing.
In this portion, the people of Israel are tasked with completing the conquests initiated by Joshua. But when Israel neglects their duty and abandons their God, he sends foreign nations to test and oppress them. Yet he gives them salvation by the hand of the first judge, Othniel.
So this portion begins with some of the people of Israel beginning to drive out the Canaanites in their tribal allotments. We had previously read in the book of Joshua that Joshua had led the people of Israel through the conquest of Canaan. They had gone through and they'd conquered a bunch of different Canaanite people groups. But God hadn't driven out all the Canaanites yet because he'd promised that he'd drive them out little by little rather than all at once. And so now that Joshua has died, it's up to each tribe of the people of Israel to drive out the remaining Canaanites. And so it starts out with the people of Israel coming to God and saying, which tribe should start first? And God says, Judah should start first. And so as we begin Judges, it records Judah and Simeon both, because they live in the same basic area, that they both go and start driving out the Canaanites in their territory. So the first thing that happens here is that the people of Judah conquer a city called Bezek, and Judah ends up defeating an army of 10,000 men, and they capture the king of Bezek, who is known as Adoni-Bezek, which means master of Bezek. And in this weird little story, it says that Judah ends up cutting off the thumbs and big toes of Adoni-Bezek. And then Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to gather up scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. So this is kind of a weird detail to include, but it is interesting that Adoni-Bezek, he's this ruthless, evil guy, and he's recognizing that Judah coming and doing this to him is God repaying him for the evil that he had done to others.
We see here with this victory that God is still fighting for the people of Israel, even though Joshua has died, because Adoni-Bezek is not just some little Canaanite king. As he says, he had subjugated 70 kings, and they were all serving him and looking for scraps under his table. And he had an army of 10,000 strong. So this is not a joke. This is a big deal that Judah was able to do this victory. And it wasn't even the whole assembly of Israel fighting this battle. It was just the tribes of Judah and Simeon alone. But even though Joshua has died and they're not all in one camp together and they're going out their own separate ways to get their own inheritances, God is still going to fight for the people of Israel when they fight to claim their inheritances. But Judah doesn't stop with this victory. They continue to keep fighting. They're really zealous about getting this inheritance, and so they do a whole bunch of fighting. Caleb is among them, of course. He's leading that, as we read in the book of Joshua, how he took the city of Hebron and he took the city of Kiryat Sefer with the help of his nephew Othniel. And we see Judah continues to win victory against powerful enemies, including against the Anakim, or the giants who live in the land. They also even capture some Philistine cities, Gaza and Ashkelon and Ekron. Those are 3 of the 5 major Philistine cities. And at least at this time period, Judah had control of them.
And as Judges is talking about how Judah is taking more land inside of its territory, it briefly mentions a group called the Kenites. And it explicitly says that these are the descendants of Moses' father-in-law. And it says that these Kenites end up settling in the south regions of Judah's territory. We had read back in the book of Numbers that Moses' father-in-law, Hobab, he was a Midianite who was living with the people of Israel in their camp at that time. And Moses had basically asked Hobab, hey, you should stay with us and be our guide as we're going through the desert, because we're new to this area and you know this area, so why don't you come with us? And then whatever good things that God does for Israel, we'll also do for you. And Hobab ended up agreeing to stay with the people of Israel. And so we see here that his descendants are now getting settled in the land alongside the people of Judah, and they'll continue to show up just a few more times throughout Israeli history.
I think the story of the Kenites provides an excellent example of the reward that comes from having faith in God's promises. The Kenites were not even Israelites. God hadn't directly given them any promises. He'd given Israel the promises that they would go in and possess that land and have rest. But the Kenites chose to be a friend of Israel because they recognized that God's promises were given to Israel and that God was a faithful God. And Moses gave a promise that they would share in God's blessings to Israel. And so because the Kenites chose to go with Israel, be a friend of Israel, and help Israel, they in turn got to share in the promises made to Israel. That took the faith not just to have a promise from God, but to see that God had given someone else a promise and trust in that promise because they trusted in God. And so because they trusted in the promise and followed through on the promise, even though God hadn't directly given them the promise, they were able to share in the promise and in the blessings of that promise.
As this portion continues, we learn about the situation of the city of Jerusalem. And things are a little bit complicated, but basically the way it works is that Jerusalem is right on the border between the tribal allotments of Judah in the south and then Benjamin a little bit further north. And so what it said in the book of Joshua was that when the people of Judah tried to take Jerusalem, they weren't able to drive out the Jebusites. But here in Judges, it says that Judah was able to capture Jerusalem and burn it to the ground. However, it then says that the sons of Benjamin in their half of Jerusalem, they weren't able to drive out the Jebusites. And so the Jebusites continue to live among the sons of Benjamin. So Jerusalem is sort of maybe in Israelite hands, but there's definitely a significant portion of it that is still under Jebusite control, and it will continue to be that way until the time of King David.
So we see that Judah did a good job of following through and continuing to fight and conquer the Canaanites, even though Joshua wasn't with them, winning big battles, conquering cities, etc. But besides Judah and the tribes of Joseph conquering the city of Bethel, Judges then goes on to describe that a lot of the tribes did not complete the conquests that Joshua had said, you need to go complete the conquest. As we already said, Benjamin left the Jebusites in their corner of Jerusalem. And then Manasseh didn't drive out the Canaanites in a bunch of cities that had been allotted to them. And Ephraim didn't drive out the Canaanites from Gezer. And Zebulun didn't drive out the inhabitants from some of their cities. And for Asher and Naphtali, it goes so far as to say that they lived among the Canaanites. So rather than just allowing some Canaanites to continue to live among them, they were actually living with the Canaanites among them. They were almost less than the Canaanites in the areas where they were living. And this isn't just a mere lack of ability. On the contrary, it says that they don't drive them out. They're not fighting the Canaanites. In the case of some of the tribes, it says at least that they did subject the Canaanites to forced labor.
Eventually.
Yeah, when they got to be stronger, they were like, okay, you're going to be subservient now. But they don't do what Moses told them they needed to do and Joshua told them they needed to do. And God was like, this is a very important part of my covenant here, okay? You need to kill all the Canaanites, leave no survivors, do not pity them, do not spare them, break down their altars, destroy their idols, leave no man, woman, or child alive, because they are going to lead you astray after other gods. But instead, the people of Israel didn't do that. They subdued them enough to be forced laborers in some contexts. In some contexts, they just settled in right next to them and lived with them. This seems like a somewhat natural progression from what we already saw in Joshua's lifetime, where he was basically having to force the people of Israel to go to their inheritances. They were procrastinating. They didn't seem like they wanted to fight. They were just following Joshua around in their camp instead of taking possession of the land. And so Joshua had said, go take possession of the land. I'm casting lots. These are your inheritances. Go, get them. And so they went, and then they
did nothing.
Yeah, they just sat there.
I find it really interesting that at the very beginning of the book of Judges, it describes the whole people of Israel coming to Adonai and saying, which of the tribes should go first in driving out the Canaanites? And God says, Judah should go first. And so then Judah goes and they start kicking out Canaanites. And then it says that Adonai was also with the house of Joseph as they were doing Bethel. But it never again describes the people of Israel coming to God and saying, which of us should drive out Canaanites now? They're like, who should do it first? And then they did the first one, and then they were just like, and then they don't keep coming back to God. They don't follow through. They do the first thing, and then there's a little bit more that goes on, and they don't finish the job. It fizzles out, exactly. And Joshua isn't there to keep pushing them forward. Like Hosea already said, when the 7 tribes were not claiming their territories, Joshua was the one who had to push them and say, claim your land, get spots and go live in them. And so now that Joshua is gone, that drive is fizzling out. And so the people of Israel, they're losing their zeal for doing what God says. And so we see that what happens next is that the angel of Adonai shows up and confronts the people of Israel for being so lax in what they were supposed to be doing. It says that the angel of Adonai appears to them, and then Adonai says to the people, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land which I have sworn to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And as for you, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars. But you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they will become as thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. When the angel of Adonai spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept. So basically what God is saying to the people of Israel is, I made a covenant with you. I brought you out of Egypt. I brought you to this land. I have fulfilled my part of the deal so far. I've been faithful to do everything that I said, and I just said to you, follow through and finish kicking out the inhabitants of the land. And you are disobeying me, and so now you won't even be able to. I told you to drive out the Canaanites, but now you won't be able to. And so they will continue to harm you and afflict your history going forward. Basically, because you delayed and because you didn't actually follow through, now you've lost your chance. You were supposed to have this land to yourselves without Canaanites coming in and pulling you away from me. But now, because you've been content with the Canaanites, you're going to be forced to live with them, and you are going to hate it and get sick of it because they are going to cause so much trouble.
This reminds me of what the book of Hebrews says. You yourselves have a better possession and an enduring one. You must not throw away then your boldness, which is great payment of reward. For you have need of perseverance, so that you, having done the will of God, will receive the promise. For in yet a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. And my righteous one will live by faith. And if he draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. The people of Israel had been given a promise that they would have the promised land as a possession, that they would be able to take it, even though it would be little by little. They would possess the whole land. They would drive out all the Canaanites. They would have a complete reward. And while they were under Joshua, they fought for that. They were bold. They fought battles against enemies far greater than them. And even after Joshua's death, Judah continued to do that and defeated an army 10,000 strong. But after that, the tribes drew back. They stopped having that boldness. They stopped going forth in faith and fighting God's battles. Because of that, they ended up not receiving the promise. Their refusal to follow through and persevere, even though God had said, I'm not going to do it all at once, but I'm going to do it. You just have to keep going. They didn't keep going, and that shows a faithlessness on their part. They had no faith that God would continue to fight for them. They weren't willing to put in the effort in order to get the reward. And because of that, because they stopped being bold and they stopped putting in the effort and they gave up and drew back, God said, I hate this. I have no pleasure in you. You have upset me. I am angry. And you know what? You're not going to get the promise. You are going to be tormented by these Canaanites. The ones that I said I would drive them all away from you, well, now they are going to drive you nuts. But the author of Hebrews says that we, as followers of Messiah, have a better possession and an enduring one. God has given us a promised land in the heavens. Yeshua has made the way, and he has conquered death. And so we have a promise ready for us, but we have to persevere. We have to be bold in following Yeshua, walking the way he walked, not drawing back. Because if we draw back, if we throw away our boldness, then we don't have that reward. We won't receive the promise. Yeshua is coming, and we are waiting for him, and that requires patience. But with patience, we need perseverance, and with perseverance, we need faith. So above all, we need to have the faith to do God's will. Even though we don't have the entire promise now, we need to keep pressing on, because we will have it at the end, but only if we press on.
I think it's also worth noting that these tribes of Israel, they felt like they had already received the promise. They were in their land. They're like, hey, we finally made it. We're here. And then they just stopped, even though there was more work to be done. And when they were doing the work of driving out the Canaanites, it explicitly says with Judah that Adonai was with them. And with Joseph, Adonai was with them. But obviously God wasn't with them when they weren't actually doing the work. And so now God is saying to the people of Israel, since you weren't doing the work, I'm not going to help you with the work, because I'm not going to do this for you. When the people of Israel were trusting in God and following through on the commands that God gave to them, then God was fighting for them all the way. These victories were God's victories. And so even though the people of Israel were fighting, it wasn't really their own fighting that was driving out the Canaanites, it was God himself. But the people of Israel still needed to do their part, even though their part isn't what actually gains them the victory. It's God who gives them the victory. But the people of Israel have a responsibility. And when they neglect their responsibility, God won't keep fighting their battles for them. And so for all of us as followers of Messiah, we need to not be so content with what Messiah has already given us, which is overflowing and abundant newness of life. That is amazing. But we haven't received the fullness of the promise yet, which is everlasting life in the new heavens and new earth with him. We don't have that yet. Yeshua has gone away to prepare a place for us, and we'll go there later. But for right now, we are on this earth, and we have a down payment of the promise that's to come, but we have a responsibility to proclaim the good news, to be a light of Yeshua's salvation. And so if we are content to just sit back in the new life that God has given us and say, we made it, we're wrong. We have not made it. And if we delude ourselves into thinking that we have made it, then we will lose our boldness, we will draw back, and God will have no pleasure in us. So this is just a really important lesson that all of us need to persevere, press on, keep going, and be diligent to actually enter the eternal promised land.
And so after this had happened, the people of Israel freaked out and they wept and they sacrificed to God. And so you would think that this would be a major wake-up call for the people of Israel and that they would return to being righteous. But instead, we see exactly the opposite, and that the next generation continues to serve foreign gods and abandon God. Basically, as long as Joshua had lived, and even the elders of the people of Israel in that generation, they all led the people of Israel righteously. And during those days, the people of Israel followed God and did what he said and did what Joshua said. But then after Joshua and his generation died, it says that there arose another generation after them who did not know Adonai or the work that he had done for Israel. Basically, the elders of the people of Israel during this conquest were the last remaining people who had seen all the good things that God had done for the people of Israel in Egypt and throughout the desert period. They were just children when God had struck Egypt with the 10 plagues and had brought them up out of slavery and had given them the Torah at Sinai. And then he had led them and sustained them with manna all those years in the wilderness. And then as they grew, and then when they were older, he brought them into the land of Israel, and he did all those great battles and defeated their enemies before them. But all the people who saw that are now dead. They don't remember the fear of God that Moses instilled in them. And so because they don't have this personal experience with all those wonders of old, they quickly forget it and abandon it and instead serve the Baals and the gods of the Canaanites.
And this is a danger that all of us can fall into, because we weren't around when God gave the 10 Commandments. We weren't around when God split the Red Sea. We weren't around when there was the conquest of Canaan. We weren't around when Yeshua gave his sacrifice or any of the other biblical events in between. We weren't around for that. All we can do is read it in this book. But if we forget what's in this book, and if we don't read this, then we won't know what God did for Israel, and therefore we won't know who God is, and our allegiance to him will be very fickle. The people who God worked through among the people of Israel, they serve as witnesses and examples of faith for us. And the wicked generations of Israel, they serve as warnings for us about what not to do. And so if we neglect the history in this book, then we are neglecting so much of who God is and who he has shown himself to be so that we can know him and serve him. We're going through Joshua and Judges right now. We're going to continue going on through Samuel and Kings, hopefully. And these are books that have a lot of history in them. They aren't really theological they're sort of theological, but they tell a lot of history. And a lot of people might find that boring. A lot of people might gloss over these sections and be like, oh, I want to focus on the New Testament or something like that. There are certain parts where it's like we neglect parts of the book and we focus on other parts of the book. But everything that God has done for the people of Israel is important for us to know. If we don't know what God has done, then we won't know who God is.
In the Torah, and especially in the book of Deuteronomy, a theme that Moses repeated on was the theme of testimony. That he had Joshua write the entire Torah and set it up as a monument to be a testimony to the people of Israel. And that he wrote down all the Torah in a scroll, and that he had this scroll as a testimony. The written scriptures were a testimony for the people of Israel to know their history, to know what God had done, to know who God is, and to know what God expects of them. Moses was well aware that in just a generation, there would be no one left who actually had witnessed God firsthand, who had seen all the wonders that he had done. So he wrote it down. He left the testimony so that the people of Israel would be without excuse, so that they wouldn't be able to forget, because that record is always there to speak against them, to say, aren't you forgetting something? And another aspect of this is that it specifically reiterates over and over again that this generation, because they didn't know God, they abandoned Adonai. They abandoned Adonai, the God of their fathers. They abandoned Adonai and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. And I find this to be a very pungent way to say this, especially in light of the fact that God's house is among the people of Israel. God is dwelling with his people. Joshua set up the tent at Shiloh, and that is where the Ark of the Covenant is. That is where that scroll of witness is. That is where God himself lives, while the priests minister to him for the sake of the people. And God lives among them to be their God and for them to be his people. But while God is there, waiting for the people to come to him, waiting for them to bring their sacrifices and their services and observe his feasts, all at the place where he is waiting for them, they've abandoned him. They're going their own ways. They're doing their own things. They're staying where they want to stay. They're serving whatever God they want to serve. They're offering their sacrifices wherever which way to whatever which God, as long as they can just stay where they are. But they're completely abandoning God. God is left alone in the midst of his own land, in the midst of his own people.
Ugh, that hurts my heart.
It hurt God's heart too.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is a lesson that can be applied to all of us as followers of Messiah, especially in light of what Yaakov says. Adulteresses, have you not known that the world's friendship is hostility with God? Whoever then wants to be a friend of the world is made an enemy of God. Do you think that emptily the scripture says that with envy, the Ruach that he caused to live in us earnestly desires us? The people of Israel because they were friendly with the Canaanites, instead of driving them all out, they ended up serving the gods of the Canaanites. And because they were serving those gods, they abandoned God. They left him all alone. And this is very much like cheating on your spouse. God compares it to that a bunch of times in the prophets. But Yaakov says it's the same with us when we make friends of the world, as Israel made friends of the Canaanites. The Spirit of God that lives in us is envious for us because he has claimed us as his own and we are his people and he lives in us while we are friends of the world, serving whatever gods we want, doing whatever we want, and leaving him all alone. Instead, we need to be coming near to God. We need to be humble before him and go to him, first of all, not go wherever we want to go. Instead, go to him, offer our services to him, offer our love to him, because he deserves it all. And if we give our love and our service and our attention to anything other than God, then we're cheating him. And it's like we're adulteresses. So we need to be very careful to always give our love to God, give our focus to God, and serve him alone and serve no one else.
So now that Judges has laid out the current situation that Israel is in, it then moves on to basically give an overview of what happens throughout the Judges period. Basically, it lays out this cycle that Israel is going to go through over and over and over again for the next few centuries. And this cycle is that Israel is evil, they abandon God, and they serve false gods. And so then God becomes really angry with Israel and starts to punish them by bringing foreign nations to occupy and oppress Israel. And this is in line with what God had promised in the Torah, which was that if they abandoned the Torah and didn't obey God's commands, then God would make it really hard on Israel and their enemies would defeat them. But then after Israel's oppressed for a long time, they end up crying out to Adonai, and Adonai pities them. Even though he's punishing them, he still remembers them. And so out of his mercy, even though Israel does not deserve it at all, God raises up a judge, a leader in Israel who is actually a military leader who then leads Israel to defeat their enemies, and he saves them from their oppression. And then during the lifetime of that judge, Israel's okay. But then after that judge dies, the people of Israel go back to their sinning and their idolatry. And so then God gets angry with them again and punishes them again. Then they cry out to God, God sends another judge, they're okay, and then so it just keeps going on. And we'll see this cycle over and over again throughout the book of Judges.
God raising up judges for Israel is actually something that he had already said he was going to do by Moses. Moses had specifically made mention of whenever the people of Israel have a legal dispute, they would go up to hear what the judge who was in office in those days would say. And that judge would then deliver a verdict from God, and the people of Israel would have to obey that judgment. In fact, Moses said, anyone who disobeys the judge needs to be put to death. And so this is God's basically preferred governance system for the people of Israel, that he would raise up these judges. And that's why they're called judges, because more than leading the people of Israel in battle to give them victory over their enemies, they also lead the people of Israel in following the Torah and knowing what the book says and doing it. And so God is always with the judges. These judges have divine backing to lead the people of Israel in following the Torah, living according to righteousness, not following other gods, not forsaking Adonai, and instead having peace and security and righteousness in the land. But what we see here from this passage, and we're going to see it throughout the book of Judges, but since it's summing up the book, it just goes ahead and tells us right out of the gate, even though God keeps punishing the people of Israel, testing them and training them and saving them, they then keep going right back to their sin. God raises up the judges as deliverers, not only from their foreign enemies, but also to deliver them from their own wickedness and to give them the Torah and say, hey, you need to be doing this. But every time the judge dies, the people of Israel are suddenly like, well, we don't have a leader anymore to tell us to not be bad, so let's be bad. And the reality is, this is not much of a shock, because Moses had already warned about it and Joshua had already warned about it. because Moses had said, you guys don't have ears to hear this Torah that I'm telling you. And Joshua had said, you are not able to serve Adonai your God. And this was because both of them knew that the people of Israel were still stubborn and rebellious. And the only reason they were following God was because Moses and Joshua were leading them. The people of Israel don't have a heart to know God. They are incapable of knowing God personally. Instead, whenever they serve God, they're serving him vicariously through someone else. And as soon as that person's gone, they never knew God. And so they still don't know God, and they go right back to being wicked. And so this shows that the Torah is not enough, and the judges are not enough, and that there is still a need for the people of Israel to know God personally, so that they don't forget him and all the things that he's done for the people of Israel, because they have a one-on-one relationship with their God and their Savior. And that can only be fulfilled through the new covenant, through the Messiah Yeshua, who came and lived among the people and gave up his own life so that the people could be reconciled to God and know him personally, as Jeremiah says, all from the least to the greatest. And they don't need to teach each other to know God because they all know him.
Now, after giving this overall summary of what's going to be happening in the book of Judges, it explicitly says that God left some nations in the land of Canaan in order to test the people of Israel. Basically, it lists how God had left the people of the Philistines down in the south of Israel, and they left the Sidonians and other Phoenician groups and Canaanites up in the north of Israel. And it says that he left them there to test Israel. Here's what it says. Because this nation, the nation of Israel, has transgressed my covenant which I commanded to their fathers and has not listened to my voice, I also will no longer drive out from before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them, whether they will keep the way of Adonai to walk in it as their fathers did, or not. These are the nations which Adonai left to test Israel by them, that is, all who had not experienced any of the wars of Canaan, only in order that the generations of the sons of Israel might be taught war, those who had not experienced it formerly. They were for testing Israel to find out if they would obey the commandments of Adonai, which he had commanded their fathers through Moses. So it says it multiple different ways, but basically Judges is telling us that God wanted the later generations of the people of Israel, the ones who had no part in the conquest of Canaan, to learn to fear God and follow him. And so he wanted them to know what it was like to fight the Canaanites like their forefathers had done. But also he wanted to test them to see, to find out whether they would obey God or not. And more often than not, they wouldn't obey God. They failed that test. But the point is that God left that hardship for the people of Israel in order to see what they would do, to test their hearts and see their hearts through their actions. And this is actually something that God will often do for all of us. We will often face times of testing, which will test whether we're going to follow God and walk in his ways, or whether we're going to follow our own hearts, walk in our own ways, and walk in the ways of the world. And 1 Corinthians explicitly says that when we are tested, God won't ever test us in a way that's above our abilities. We'll never be tested so hard that as humans, we physically have no way to avoid falling into that sin. Instead, whenever we are tested, God provides a way out so that way we won't walk in that sin. He provides us with an actual choice. Walk in my ways or walk in the ways of the world and the ways of sin. And so whenever we're in these tough circumstances, when we're being tempted, when we're being drawn away from God, we need to press in closer to God. We need to embrace the test. Yaakov says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you fall into various ways of testing, knowing that the proving of your faith brings about perseverance in you." We'd already been talking about perseverance and how the people of Israel needed to persevere to gain the promises. And so if we actually embrace these tests and we learn from them, unlike just going through the test, failing, and then just keeping on failing over and over like the people of Israel did, if we actually learn from these tests and allow them to grow us and build our faith and build our perseverance, then we'll actually be able to get closer to God. And it will reveal our hearts and show us whether we're actually following God or not. And so when hardships come to our lives, We need to not think that God is abandoning us. We can embrace that and accept that as this can be a test of my faith, and I'm going to make sure that I pass this test and I won't be disqualified.
And so after this, we read about the very first judge, Othniel. Basically, God left those nations to test the people of Israel, and they absolutely failed the test miserably because they married with the Canaanites and served their gods and provoked God to anger by doing what was evil in his sight. And so God sent them into the hand of a king called Cushan-Rishathaim, long name, and he subdued the people of Israel, and they had to serve him for 8 years. And so after 8 years of Israel being oppressed, they cry out to God, and God sends them a deliverer. Specifically, he sends them Othniel, the son of Kenaz, who was Caleb's nephew. This is the same Othniel that we had talked about previously, who had helped Caleb in the conquest of part of Judah and had achieved that inheritance and then gotten Caleb's daughter as his wife. So Othniel is already known as a warrior. And also the fact that Othniel is the judge chosen here shows that this is really close to the events of Joshua. It's really only one generation has passed, and now Othniel is part of the older generation who has been chosen to lead the people of Israel. And it says, the spirit of Adonai was upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and Adonai gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand. And so like we were saying before, when God raises up a judge, it's not just to be a warrior, although Othniel obviously was already a warrior, but specifically, Othniel has been given the spirit of Adonai. So he's specifically been given this divine charge and divine power with him to judge Israel, just as Moses and Joshua had the spirit. Othniel is not just some guy who decided, I'm going to go lead Israel now. He specifically has been given a divine mandate and divine backing and authority through the Spirit of God to judge the people of Israel, lead them in righteousness, and give them victory. And so as long as Othniel lives, the people of Israel have rest, and that lasts for 40 years, and then Othniel dies. So, the main takeaway from this portion is don't abandon the promises and commands of God. Under Moses, God had given the people of Israel a promise, actually a renewal of the promise he had made even to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that promise was that the people of Israel would go in and take that land, and that they would dispossess the Canaanites, and they would have rest in a land of prosperity. And as long as they were in the days of Joshua and they were fighting and they were following through on that promise, they were receiving it. But along with that promise, there came a simple command. So simple, just follow through on the promise. Actually possess the land that I'm giving you to possess. Actually drive out the Canaanites that I'm driving out before you. But after the death of Joshua, the people of Israel abandoned that command and abandoned that promise. They grew content with what they already had at the expense of what God had said he would give to them. And so because of this, because they drew back from God, God was no longer fighting for them because they weren't fighting. And so the nations which remained to test and ensnare the people of Israel led them astray and made things far worse, because once the people of Israel had abandoned that promise and abandoned that command, they then proceeded to abandon God entirely, completely forsaking his Torah and forgetting all the good that he had done for the people of Israel. They instead turned to the nations around them. They loved the world, they loved the Canaanites, and they loved the gods of the Canaanites, and they left God all alone. And this provoked God to grief and jealousy and anger until he brought punishment on them, and they had to serve their enemies, serve the foreign nations which they had loved so much. We need to take this as a cautionary tale. We know what God has done for us. We have witnessed it, and we have a testimony of what is written of all the things that he's done. And so we should believe, we should remember. We need to not forget, and instead in faith hold on to God's promises, hold on to his commands, not draw back. Don't be complacent. Be bold to do everything that God has given you to do. If we love the world and abandon God, then God will let us have what we want, and we will not only have the world, but we will be subservient to the world, and our own desires will control us with cruelty. But as God raised up a judge for Israel to save Israel, whenever they turned away from him, he brought someone to turn them back and rescue them. God sent Yeshua to rescue all of us, and his way of mercy is always open. Whenever we cry out to him, he will rescue us. He will deliver us from our sin. If we turn to him, if we love him, if we put our trust in him, then no matter how many times we've gone astray, he will forget our sins, and we will be able to know God through his Spirit. Just as God put his Spirit on the judge, Othniel, we can all have the Spirit. We can have that relationship with God, and we can have the boldness and the courage and the victory that comes with that if we trust in God, put our faith in him, and take the way of salvation through the judge and deliverer that he has sent, our Messiah, Yeshua.
That wraps up this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions for us to answer or ideas for future videos, why don't you let us know down in the comments? We would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to keep updated on new videos. And if you would, please consider sending us a donation to help us make more videos like these. We would really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next week. God bless.